Section 5. The 1,000 Dozen of the Faith of Men. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mary Anderson. The 1,000 Dozen by Jack London. David Rasmunsen was a hustler, and like many a greater man, a man of the one idea. Wherefore, when the clarion call of the North rang on his ear, he conceived an adventure in eggs, and bent all his energy to its achievement. He figured briefly and to the point, and the adventure became iridescent-hued, splendid. That eggs would sell at Dawson for $5 a dozen was a safe working premise. Whence it was incontrovertible that 1,000 dozen would bring in the golden metropolis, $5,000. On the other hand, expense was to be considered, and he considered it well, for he was a careful man, keenly practical, with a hard head, and a heart that imagination never warmed. At 15 cents a dozen, the initial cost of his 1,000 dozen would be $150, a mere bagatelle in face of the enormous profit. And suppose, just suppose, to be wildly extravagant for once, that transportation for himself and eggs should run up $850 more, he would still have 4,000 clear cash and clean when the last egg was disposed of and the last dust had rippled into his sack. You see, Alma, he figured it over with his wife, the cozy dining room submerged in a sea of maps, government surveys, guide-books, and Alaskan itineraries. You see, expenses don't really begin till you make Dyea. $50 will cover it with a first-class passage thrown in. Now from Dyea to Lake Linderman, Indian packers take your goods over for 12 cents a pound, $12 a hundred, or $120 a thousand. Say I have 1,500 pounds, it'll cost $180. Call it 200 and be safe. I am credibly informed by a Klondiker, just come out, that I can buy a boat for 300. But the same man says I'm sure to get a couple of passengers for 150 each, which will give me the boat for nothing. And further, they can help me manage it. And that's all. I put my eggs ashore from the boat at Dawson. Now let me see, how much is that? $50 from San Francisco to Dyea, 200 from Dyea to Linderman. Passengers pay for the boat. 250 all told, she summed up swiftly. And 100 for my clothes and personal outfit, he went on happily. That leaves a margin of 500 for emergencies. And what possible emergencies can arise? Alma shrugged her shoulders and elevated her brows. If that vast Northland was capable of swallowing up a man and 1,000 dozen eggs, surely there was room and to spare for whatever else he might happen to possess. So she thought, but she said nothing. She knew David Rasmunsen too well to say anything. Doubling the time because of chance delays, I should make the trip in 2 months. Think of it, Alma, 4,000 in 2 months. Beats the paltry 100 a month I'm getting now. Why, we'll build further out, where we'll have more space, gas in every room, and a view, and the rent of the cottage'll pay taxes, insurance, and water, and leave something over. And then there's always the chance of my striking it and coming out a millionaire. Now tell me, Alma, don't you think I'm very moderate? And Alma could hardly think otherwise. Besides, had not her own cousin, though a remote and distant one to be sure, the black sheep, the harum-scarum, the ne'er-do-well, had not he come down out of that weird North country with 100,000 in yellow dust, to say nothing of a half ownership in the hole from which it came? David Rasmunsen's grocer was surprised when he found him weighing eggs in the scales at the end of the counter. And Rasmunsen himself was more surprised when he found that a dozen eggs weighed 1.5 pounds, 1,500 pounds for his 1,000 dozen. There would be no weight left for his clothes, blankets, and cooking utensils, to say nothing of the grub he must necessarily consume by the way. His calculations were all thrown out, and he was just proceeding to recast them when he hit upon the idea of weighing small eggs. For whether they be large or small, a dozen eggs is a dozen eggs, he observed sagely to himself, and a dozen small ones he found to weigh but 1.25 pounds. Thereat the city of San Francisco was overrun by anxious-eyed emissaries, and commission houses and dairy associations were startled by a sudden demand for eggs running not more than 20 ounces to the dozen. Rasmunsen mortgaged the little cottage for $1,000, arranged for his wife to make a prolonged stay among her own people, threw up his job, and started north. To keep within his schedule he compromised on a second-class passage, which, because of the rush, was worse than steerage, and in the late summer, a pale and wobbly man, he disembarked with his eggs on the Dyea beach. But it did not take him long to recover his land legs and appetite. His first interview with the Chilkoot packers straightened him up and stiffened his backbone. 40 cents a pound they demanded for the 28-mile portage, and while he caught his breath and swallowed, the price went up to 43. 15 husky Indians put the straps on his packs at 45, but took them off at an offer of 47 from a Skagway Croesus in dirty shirt and ragged overalls, who had lost his horses on the White Pass Trail and was now making a last desperate drive at the country by way of Chilkoot. But Rasmunsen was clean grit, and at 50 cents found takers, who 2 days later set his eggs down intact at Linderman. But 50 cents a pound is $1,000 a ton, and as 1,500 pounds had exhausted his emergency fund and left him stranded at the Tantalus Point, where each day he saw the fresh whipsawed boats departing for Dawson. Further, a great anxiety brooded over the camp where the boats were built. Men worked frantically early and late, at the height of their endurance, caulking, nailing, and pitching in a frenzy of haste, for which adequate explanation was not far to seek. Each day the snow line crept farther down the bleak, rock-shouldered peaks, and gale followed gale with sleet and slush and snow, and in the eddies and quiet places young ice formed and thickened through the fleeting hours. And each morn toil-stiffened men turned wan faces across the lake to see if the freeze-up had come, for the freeze-up heralded the death of their hope, the hope that they would be floating down the swift river ere navigation closed on the chain of lakes. To harrow Rasmunsen's soul further, he discovered 3 competitors in the egg business. It was true that one, a little German, had gone broke and was himself forlornly back-tripping the last pack of the portage, but the other 2 had boats nearly completed, and were daily supplicating the God of merchants and traders to stay the iron hand of winter for just another day. But the iron hand closed down over the land. Men were being frozen in the blizzard which swept Chilkoot, and Rasmunsen frosted his toes ere he was aware. He found a chance to go passenger with his freight in a boat just shoving off through the rubble, but 200 hard cash was required, and he had no money. "I t'ink you yust wait a leetle while," said the Swedish boat builder, who had struck his Klondike right there and was wise enough to know it. "One leetle while, and I make you a tom fine skiff boat, sure Pete." With this unpledged word to go on, Rasmunsen hit the back trail to Crater Lake, where he fell in with 2 press correspondents whose tangled baggage was strewn from Stonehouse over across the pass and as